My free hit is active ahead of the big double game week in 34. So let's take a look at 3 free hit drafts that I already really like the look of. Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey, and today I want to start taking a look at my free hit side ahead of game week 34. Now this video, if you're not on a free hit, can hopefully still be really useful, especially if you're looking at building the best possible side for game week 34 to combat anyone on the free hit, or if you're looking at dead ending this week, so final transfers in before wildcarding in game week 35, which I know will be popular for some. In the meantime, though, let's start off with looking at what I consider to be some of the non-negotiable players that I would have on any free hit draft going into game week 34. Now, obviously, even these are up for debate. It's only my personal opinion. And in any team, you're well within your own right to disagree with these 4 players and go with something completely different. However, I think these 4 players are going to be very important, and I'll quickly explain the reasons why. So Arsenal, just recording after they lost 2-0 at home to Villa, so a big dent in their title hopes. Very unfortunate for them, but generally across the season, they've been incredible at the back. And I think going into game week 34 without any Arsenal defence, even with the fixtures on the table, I think it's still going to be too risky for me. And Gabriel seems to represent also the best goal threat from that defence. So if I was picking one Arsenal defender, I don't think it has to be Gabriel. I'd certainly have to have one Arsenal defender on my free hit just to cover off any risk, because I don't want to just start falling down the ranks. Arsenal defenders are very popular. A lot of people will have the double up as well. So going without any of them when they've been that tight at the back seems quite risky to me. Now, obviously, again, you might want to go against it and it might pay off. But even against Wolves and Chelsea, I still think there's a decent chance of clean sheets in either of those games. Definitely not certainties, and you definitely could gamble against it. I think it's too risky for me, and I think that they will try and be as tight at the back as physically possible, and they have been the best defence in the league statistically by quite some margin this season. Gabriel's goal threat, as I mentioned, especially from set pieces, is incredibly high for a centre-back, so I think he would be the first player I'd have in, but of course, as I mentioned, you could look at others. Moving into midfield, and I think we do need to stop for 1 minute and have a quick talk about Mo Salah. He hasn't been fantastic recently, and people in the FPL community are starting to wonder whether or not he's actually going to be worth the money. And it is something that I'm wondering, maybe not necessarily about whether I'm picking him or not, but whether or not I want to put the armband on him. Now, I think to be balanced, his data is still incredibly good. I think in 2 of his last 4 matches, he's had an XG of over 1 goal, which for any midfielder is still elite numbers. He hasn't exactly had his finishing boots on recently, that is fair to say, and he hasn't looked at his very sharpest, but he's still getting the chances, and all it takes for Mo Salah is one of those to go in, and all of a sudden he can go on a run again. So I think for me, I wouldn't personally be going without Mo Salah on a free hit. Mainly also because when you're looking elsewhere with Liverpool, I think it's quite a conundrum who you would go to at this point. There are positives and negatives for most of their other players at the moment, and Mo Salah seems like one of the players that should be locked in to play both matches. He will get good data, he is on penalties, so he doesn't even need to play well for him to still get attacking returns, and I think that is the swinging factor for Mo Salah at the moment. Now, obviously, you could risk going without him, but personally, I still think he'll do well. 2 good fixtures against Fulham and Everton. By no means are they going to be easy wins for Liverpool, but Mo Salah does get chances, and I imagine he will be getting chances in the minutes that he gets across a double game week against those 2 sides. So for me, I will admit he's not been at his best recently, but the data is still there, and I think personally, considering when you're looking around elsewhere at other midfielders you might go for on a double game week, he still ranks very, very highly. Speaking of ranking very, very highly, Bukayo Saka. Now, again, blanked today, has been looking a little bit off of it very recently, has had his injury knocks in the last few weeks, and every single week he seems to be hobbling off the pitch. But that does go to show that he is still starting every single week. And I think Wolves and Chelsea, not amazing games, of course, but still good enough that you'd expect Saka to do decently across the double. Now, there are other options in midfield for Arsenal. You could look at Ødegaard, you could look at Havertz, And you could look potentially even someone really off the wall like Trossard. But for me, Saka, again, he's on penalties. The underlying data at 0.8 XGI per 90 is still very, very good. And I think across a double game week, 2 fixtures, you want the players that are very likely to get the most minutes, especially if they're on penalties and with good data. And Saka and Salah both tick those boxes. Another player that ticks all of those boxes is Dominic Solanke. Now, again, on penalties, usually gets 90 minutes, and he is a talismanic figure for Bournemouth. 2 away fixtures, so again, I don't think there's any one team with a great double game week this week in terms of the 2 fixtures. It's not like anyone's playing Burnley and Sheffield United at home. But Solanke away from home at both Villa and Wolves, I think across a double is good enough, especially when you look at some of the other strikers on offer, that you'd expect him to get 1 or maybe 2 returns across that double. Again, it's a player that maybe you disagree and maybe you want to risk going without, but I think his ownership is high. He's been in sensational form all season. He's on penalties and he gets 90 minutes. So for me, these 4 players are an absolute lock on my free hit, unless one of them gets injured and we know that they're not going to start at least one of the 2 games. Then questions will obviously crop up. But for now, these are the 4 players that, no matter what, I think I'm building my free hit around. So moving on to the 3 different free hit drafts, and all of them will have quite considerable similarities at this point because there are a cluster of players that I really like the look of. However, there are key differences in each of these, and I think it comes down to whether or not you believe certain things are going to happen in the double game week. So whether or not you back double Arsenal defence, so clean sheets for Arsenal, or whether you'd prefer double Arsenal attack because you think they're going to go for it against Wolves and Chelsea. And similarly with Liverpool, do you still back the triple attack? Do you still think that they're going to create enough chances to make it worthwhile holding on to 3 of them? Do you also believe that they're going to get good enough minutes as well? That's a key question that we need to ask ourselves. Or do you think across that double with Fulham and Everton both away from home, they can get a clean sheet, maybe even 2, and therefore you want to lean into their defence a little bit more? Now, this first free hit draft is one with probably the more traditional setup, I would say. That is backing Arsenal to continue being an elite defence this season. So Wolves and Chelsea, okay, decent chances for both of them to create ample opportunities to score. But Arsenal's defence has been very sturdy all season, and backing them as a double defence is going to be the only way you're going to get any gain from a clean sheet. I can confidently say that the average ownership of Arsenal defenders across FPL in any significant ranks is going to be over 100%, which basically means you need more than 1 defender to get benefit from their clean sheets. That's if they get clean sheets. So with this draft in mind, I'm backing the clean sheets for Arsenal. I'm going double defence and keeping Saka in there as well as the 1 attacker. And I'm going with triple Liverpool attack. Now that's the second risk with this draft. It's whether or not you think one of 2 things is going to happen. 1, you think Liverpool are going to continue being free-flowing, goal-scoring team and keep scoring plenty of goals. Because if they only score 1 or 2 goals in each of those 2 fixtures, it's unlikely that you're going to get the exact combination of players that are all going to haul and therefore make this free hit draft as explosive as you want it to be. But Mo Salah, as I mentioned, is probably a lock on my free hit. And then the other 2 on this particular draft are Diaz and Nunez. Now, both of which have looked fairly disappointing in the most recent fixture. Both of them got hooked off early as well, which I'll come on to in just a moment's time. But Liverpool have been quite wasteful in front of goal recently. And despite the fact that both of them have had plenty of chances, Nunez especially has been wasteful recently. Still, plenty of attacking returns across the season for them both, so I do like this free hit draft and this setup. And if you back them to get back to winning ways and score plenty of goals across those 2 fixtures, then I think it is worth chasing the upside. However, coming on to the second issue with the Liverpool triple up on attack, they do have options coming back. So not only do they have this front 3, they've also got Jota coming back from injury, and they've also got Gakpo waiting in the wings as well. And that obviously will impact both Diaz and Darwin's minutes moving into the double game week in a really congested fixture schedule. They've also got the return leg to Atalanta in the Europa League as well. They're 3-0 down, so it's going to be really, really interesting to see whether Klopp goes full rotation in that game, or whether he goes strong and tries to take Atalanta down and win that tie. Now, obviously, he'll always say, I'm going to put out the best possible side to beat Atalanta, but we will be able to tell whether or not he's going full guns blazing or not if perhaps we see Gakpo, Harvey Elliott starting ahead of Salah, maybe even Gomez starting ahead of Trent. Then we can start to maybe take a good guess at who the starting 11 will be against Fulham, and then also potentially get good minutes against Everton as well. So, if you have confidence that Diaz and Darwin get good minutes and continue to get good minutes in that double game week, then this could be the explosive front three draft for you, tripling up on the Liverpool attack. Now, that's not going to be for everyone, so the next 2 free hit drafts hopefully will give you something else to think about. But before we move on, let's talk about some of the more peripheral pieces. So Cunha up front is a player that I really like the look of at the moment. And yes, that Arsenal home game is far from ideal. I've already discussed the merits of a double Arsenal defence, and having a double up in defence versus a Wolves attacker in this free hit draft is possibly a limitation. However, Cunha has been fantastic recently, and that run also goes back to before he got injured as well. He'd been fantastic form before the injury. He's come back in, he's finally getting good minutes again, obviously got the brace, and that first goal was absolutely sensational. So he's a player that I really like the look of on a free hit draft. One of the 2 game weeks, one of the 2 fixtures rather, is obviously going to be far from ideal, but I think, like we've just seen, there will be the odd opportunity in any given game, and he's been in great form recently. And then the Bournemouth home game as well, I'd have no worries about, and probably consider that a pretty decent attacking game for him to potentially get some sort of attacking return in. Again, at 5.5 million, he does enable a lot as well, so I do really like him. But he's not the only forward I'd be looking at, and I do have a section later on talking about some of the other differential options you could potentially be looking at in your front 3 or even front 2. Now, moving into midfield, we've talked about 3 of them, so let's talk about Eze. And I think, in all honesty, he's also in every single one of my free hit drafts as well. He's been brilliant this season. When he's been fit, he's been absolutely quality. And when Elise is also fit and in that side, Eze steps up that extra notch. He's got that bit of creativity around him, and Palace just reach a whole new level. Eze, with 2 good enough home fixtures from an attacking point of view as well, West Ham and Newcastle both do leak goals, and Eze, again, very good data, being sensational on the eye as well, and at a good price. I think he is going to be in all of my free hit drafts, and I'd be surprised if he wasn't going to be one of the top picks, especially considering he's quite differential at this point in time as well, ahead of 34, whether you're on a free hit or not. Moving into defence, the other defender I haven't mentioned yet is Ait-Nouri. Now, he is going to be a player that we need to keep our eye on for the entire week. We're going to have to wait and see what O'Neill says in his press conference, whether he's pictured in training, because of course he missed the most recent match in game week 33. It is meant to be a fairly minor knock, so fingers crossed he's going to be okay, and we'll see him in training. We'll get positive confirmation from O'Neill going into the double game week, and if so, I think his attacking threat is good enough that it balances out maybe slightly less than ideal double game week with that Arsenal home fixture in there. And I think he's just been so good, basically playing in the front 3 at times as well for Wolves, that I'd probably take a gamble on the upside and hope that maybe in the Bournemouth game there's a decent chance of a clean sheet as well. If you don't like that, the other team I'd probably keep an eye out for are Palace. Now, obviously, not a ton of clean sheets this season, but their wing-backs in particular, Munoz and Mitchell, have both looked pretty threatening on the wings recently. Obviously, Mitchell came away with a 12-pointer against Liverpool today, on Sunday as I'm recording, and I think both of them can be really decent options. However, I think Ait-Nouri's attacking potential is ever so slightly better than both of theirs, so I have put him just slightly ahead in this starting 11, but by no means is that a lock. I'll have to have a look at the data throughout the week, and I can see a world where I start one of the Palace boys instead of Ait-Nouri, especially if we don't get any sort of confirmation that he is going to be fit for that first game. Now, in goal, I've gone for Pickford in this one. Now, that is just so I can discuss him a little bit, and Henderson is on the bench. Now, that again could be flipped. You might feel more confident in Henderson, Although it must be said that Liverpool game was a bit of an outlier. He did fantastically well in it, but in 11 Premier League games running up to that, he kept no clean sheets. So it is worth noting that maybe we need to take stock of their entire season and his entire season so far, rather than just focusing on the most recent game week. That being said, though, West Ham and Newcastle as a double is probably on par overall with Nottingham Forest and Liverpool as a double. All 4 of those fixtures are at home for both sides, by the way. Liverpool are almost certainly going to score against Everton, you would think. But Nottingham Forest may be a better chance of a clean sheet than either West Ham or Newcastle for Palace. So maybe that balances out a little bit and you're hoping for the save points from Pickford, who has been decent on save points this season, it must be said. So I think it's a pretty 50-50 call between the two of them if you are picking between one of those two. There are another couple of keepers you could look at, maybe even Neto, and I will come on to a couple of the better options later on. But for the time being, that's my free hit draft number 1. On the bench, I do have Brereton Diaz at Sheffield United. Quick mention of him now. I think he has been decent underlying data at over 0.5 XGI. So as a differential, I do like him. But for me, I think he's firmly my 8th favourite attacker in terms of this structure. And I don't think there are many drafts that I'd actually have him necessarily starting, even with that Burnley home fixture, which will be tempting for some. He could be an interesting differential. But I think for me, there are 7, maybe 8 or 9 other attackers that I probably want to start in my free hit over him. And he might be maybe 8th, 9th, 10th favourite option. So definitely in consideration, definitely on the table. But for me, I'm happy enough having as my first sub for the time being. Now, my final 15th player here, won't talk about him too much, is Branthwaite. Great on the price, differential enough as well. And if you really, really needed him, he could come in as a sub as well. But realistically, I'm not going to want to be starting him if I've got Pickford there as well. I don't trust Everton enough to keep clean sheets enough that a double up is going to be worthwhile. But let me know what you think of draft 1 in the comments below, and I'll move swiftly on to draft 2, which has a couple of key differences. So as I mentioned, the drafts are fairly similar, but this one has, I think, 3 key differences. So number 1 is I've swapped over Henderson and Pickford. Again, I used Pickford as an example in the first one. In the second one, I think Henderson is also a decent option and, again, offers a bit of coverage of that Crystal Palace defence because I think both Mitchell and Munoz could be fairly popular, so covering off the percentages a little bit there with Henderson in goal might not be the worst idea, and both West Ham and Newcastle will get decent shots away, so you'd expect some save points there from Henderson as well, and who knows, you might even get lucky with a clean sheet in one of the 2 fixtures. Now, moving into defence, one of the 2 differences is that I've sacrificed one of the Liverpool attackers to bring in Van Dijk at the back. Now, Van Dijk could actually represent one of the other Liverpool defenders. You could look at Trent, you could look at Robbo, you could even look at someone like Gomez as well, although I think personally that's a little bit too risky for me now. But having Van Dijk or a Liverpool defender there would cover off any clean sheets that they do get. And I think on percentages, Fulham away from home, Everton away from home, they both are capable of scoring decent amounts of goals, but Liverpool are, I think, statistically still the 3rd best defence in the league this season. It is a big drop-off from Arsenal, so it is a bit of a sacrifice going from 2 Arsenal to 1 in defence and having Van Dijk in there. But Van Dijk is decent from set pieces as well. He's almost a guaranteed locked 90-minute man in both fixtures, which is something that can't be said for any of the Liverpool attackers, maybe barring Salah. So that is guaranteeing you the minutes a little bit more, and it does cover off any clean sheets they do get against 2 sides that, like I said, decent in attack, but not sides that you'd think are certain to score against Liverpool. So if you want to cover that defence off, Van Dijk would be the safe pick, and then you could look at maybe Trent or Robbo if you wanted to go for the upside and take a slight little bit more of a gamble on the minutes. Now, the other difference this makes to the starting 11 is that it gives me an extra slot for an Arsenal attacker where I've reduced one from the Liverpool triple up in attack. So that slot now goes to either Havertz or Ødegaard, in my personal opinion. I've put Havertz in there now, but you could easily prefer Ødegaard, although it is worth noting he got taken off early in the game against Villa today. He was phenomenal in the first half, by the way. I watched the game and he was brilliant, running the show in the first half. maybe there was a little bit of a knock there in the second half, but he wasn't actually as instrumental in the way that Arsenal played in the second half. Maybe that's just a bit of a blip, but I don't want to forget that first half performance because he was running the show. And it did tempt me to switch this up last minute and put Ødegaard ahead of Havertz. However, with that all in consideration, I've just about favoured Havertz for the time being. Gabriel didn't have the best game up front for Arsenal, and I think Havertz is quite likely to go back up top for Arsenal for both of these two games against Wolves and Chelsea. Definitely not a lock, but even if he didn't start up front, he's probably going to play in that left 8 role, and he's still got decent opportunities there today as well. So I don't hate him as an option at all. He's been in fantastic form recently. The data's been getting better and better, and he's had a bit of a run in the side where he's actually probably in the best form he's ever been in whilst in the Premier League. So I really like him as an option. It will be differential, I believe, because I think most people are probably going to go for Saka plus the double Arsenal defence. But Havertz could be that differential, or Ødegaard, that if you back them to concede in both of those games, then they're going to need to score goals if they're going to win the games anyway. So Havertz is as good a chance as anyone in that Arsenal attack. So it's all about playing the percentages. If you think that Arsenal are going to concede in both of those games, you might want to favour going double attack and hope that Havertz is on the end of a couple of those chances. That being said, I think it's pretty marginal between free hit draft 1 and 2. It all really comes down to how much you think you back Arsenal to get clean sheets, how much you back Liverpool to get clean sheets, and how many minutes you think the likes of Havertz, Ødegaard, Diaz, and Darwin are all going to get across the double game week, because all of that now is pretty up for debate. I think especially for those Liverpool attackers with the other pretty premium attackers coming back in, Jota, Gakpo as well, to take minutes off of them. I think there is an argument to take one of those attackers out and put one of those Liverpool pieces into defence just to shore up the back line a little bit. The player that we haven't really talked about too much at the moment now is Darwin. He has been very wasteful and he has made it ahead of Diaz in this draft. I had to remove one of them. I've removed Diaz, not because I don't like him and not because I think Darwin is better, but because it makes more sense for the structure to remove the midfielder, because Arsenal fundamentally have lots of midfielders that you might consider, but Gabriel up front is probably not a player that you want to switch in for Darwin. So it's all about balance. Darwin stays in mainly because of that structure and keeping the fact that I can still then have 3 Arsenal players, 3 Liverpool players in my team. But again, let me know in the comments below what you think of this slight tweak from draft 1 to draft 2, and whether or not you would back the Liverpool defence across the double more than you would back them to get loads and loads of attacking returns. The same goes for Arsenal, but in reverse. Would you back them to get more goals than the clean sheet points that you might accumulate by having the double up? So on to the third and final draft for today, and then we'll go into some differentials and other alternative options that you might like a look of. However, this draft, I think, is marginally my favourite as it stands, although it is pretty tight between the 3. But what I've done here is remove a couple of players, a couple of key pieces, to make way for Erling Haaland as well. Now, that means that I've gotten rid of Darwin, which, to be honest, at this point, I'm not really regretting too much. It keeps Haaland in, away at Brighton. Now, Brighton haven't been terrible at the back. In fact, statistically, they're up there with, I think, top 5 or 6 defences in the league. But they do still leak goals. And Haaland is, whether or not you think he's been playing well recently, still a very good striker, a phenomenal striker who averages almost a goal a game. So if you're not really backing too many of the other attacking options this week, and you want to go with someone maybe with just a bit more of a proven track record, a little bit more safety, then you might want to include Erling Haaland as the only single game weeker in your free hit. Single game weekers can still score points after all. They can still haul. It's just obviously you're getting 2 tickets for the lottery if you go for a double game week player, but quite often those tickets are on a slightly worse player that you otherwise might not include in your draft. With Haaland, he is a brilliant striker, as we know, with a decent fixture and great underlying data. So I would completely understand if you wanted to go with only 10 double game weekers and Erling Haaland, Although it is worth noting, to do so, sacrifices need to be made, and this draft is very tight on money. I think I had 105.3 or 4 million in the bank, and I've just about been able to afford this with 0.2 to spare. So this won't be something that everyone can afford, but maybe there's one or two little sacrifices you could make, especially to the bench, just to make this affordable. Now, talking about some of the other key differences in this side, it's still very similar to the last one I presented. But what I've done here, rather than having Havertz in the midfield, I've gone back to Luis Diaz to give me that Liverpool double up in attack. So Salah and Diaz. And then what I've done is, because I've removed an Arsenal midfielder and I've still got 3 slots taken up in defence, so Gabriel, Van Dijk and Ait-Nouri, none of the 3 I particularly want to get rid of. I've actually managed to remove, not Henderson, I've managed to remove Pickford, put Henderson on the bench, and Raya has come in to shore up the defence to give me 2 Arsenal assets in defence, and also give me a bit of Liverpool coverage and the attacking coverage of Ait-Nouri as well. Now, there's another way that you could play this. You could still go with 2 Arsenal defenders, and then maybe go Jose Sarr in goal instead, or you could still look at Dean Henderson, for instance. But I really like the combination of Ait-Nouri and Raya more so than a Saliba and a Dean Henderson or a Jose Sarr. I think Ait-Nouri's attacking threat is so high at the moment that I'd love to include him, whilst also still keeping the double Arsenal defence, or the double Arsenal clean sheet, as it were, as coverage on the table for this free hit draft. So whilst it removes a little bit of the attacking upside of maybe having Saliba or Ben White, it does still give me that double Arsenal clean sheet if it were to come in, whilst also giving me the attacking upside of Ait-Nouri or potentially Munoz or Mitchell, as I discussed in draft 1. So again, only a couple of key differences there, but it still gives me double up Arsenal defence, it gives me coverage of Liverpool defence, enough probably in attack for Liverpool, and a little bit of Arsenal as well, all whilst still giving me penalty takers pretty much throughout. I've got Salah, Saka, Haaland, Solanke, Eze, all on pens. And then also I've been able to include Haaland in this draft just about for the money as well. So again, this draft might be a little bit up your street. Let me know in the comments below what you think of it. And it's by no means perfect. I've definitely not talked about every single player within consideration at the moment. So that brings me on to the last section of this video, which is a number of differentials and other alternative options that maybe you like a little bit more than some of the ones that I've presented so far. So I'm going to treat this section as a bit of a lightning round, so I'll try not to dilly-dally too much on any particular player. But let's start off with the goalkeepers. So one option that has come back onto the board this week, with Kelleher now out of the side, is Alisson. Now, he is expensive for a keeper, but if you wanted surefire 90 minutes from someone, Alisson is probably as locked in as they get. And if for whatever reason you backed Liverpool to get clean sheets in either of those 2 games, or particularly if you back them to get 2 clean sheets, and you didn't like their midfield or attacking options, as discussed, minutes are a bit of a risk for them, maybe aside from Salah, possibly you'd be tempted to go for double Liverpool defence. It's not going to be for everyone, it is going to be risky, but if you wanted to do so, maybe you wanted the safety net of maybe Alisson alongside Van Dijk and hope that they get clean sheets in these double game week fixtures. Moving on, you could look at another alternative, which is Neto. Now again, Bournemouth's double isn't the best, it's 2 away fixtures, and you'd expect both Wolves and Aston Villa potentially to score, but Neto is good on the save points, and potentially, if they do get a clean sheet, he could be another interesting differential option that I certainly wouldn't be ruling out. And if you've got him already, I wouldn't be rushing to remove him from your side if you're not on a free hit, just for the sake of bringing in one of the other keepers I've discussed. I don't think there's a lot in it, and Neto could do absolutely fine. So I definitely wouldn't be rushing to sell him if you've got him now. Moving into defence, one player I love the look of is Alexander-Arnold. Now, he's a player that if you're not on a free hit, you're almost certainly not going to be able to get to unless you've got money in the bank and 2 free transfers and nothing else to do. Alexander-Arnold is going to be the ultimate differential on a free hit with great attacking upside if you have confidence and back him to start both matches. That is going to be a risk. Obviously, he got near 45 minutes in game week 33. I don't think they were expecting him to have to play 45 minutes. Obviously, Bradley came off with the injury, and Trent might not be ready to start matches just yet. But it is worth noting, because he got 45 minutes, he's clearly pretty close. And if he gets rested against Atalanta in midweek, I'd be really tempted to take a punt on him starting both of those games. They can't afford any more slip-ups. He is definitely in their best 11, and he's a creative outlet for them. And he hovers into midfield so often that the attacking side is also up there for him, that if he was to get 140, 150 minutes across the double game week, I would back him to do as well, if not better, than Van Dijk, and I would chase the upside there. Now, that is a risk based on minutes, basically, because there are other options that could play there if he's still struggling a little bit. But if you want to take a chance, he could be the ultimate differential. Same sort of goes for Robertson as well. Now, he's been getting good minutes recently, and he did look very, very sharp today against Crystal Palace. Obviously, nothing from it, but he was one of their better players on the pitch, if not probably the best player on the pitch for Liverpool. And again, if you back him to start both matches, he looks like a player who is threatening to get attacking returns, and we know historically how good he can be. So again, he's probably slightly on the riskier side of the Liverpool defenders, but has plenty of upside as well. And if you don't fancy Van Dijk, if you think that's too safe, and you want someone who's maybe a little bit closer to a guaranteed lock in the team over Alexander-Arnold, you might be tempted to go for Robertson. Moving across, so White as well in the Arsenal defence. I think he is an option that you could consider if you weren't tempted to go for a double up of Saliba alongside Gabriel or even Raya. You could look at Ben White. However, he went off fairly early today with the clean sheet locked, which is obviously very lucky for owners. But maybe there's a knock there. Maybe he's a slight rotation threat with a busy schedule to come. So I think for me personally, I probably now wouldn't go there. I think it's probably one too many factors against him. He's been phenomenal. If you've got him already, you absolutely keep, because it is still likely he gets 60 plus minutes in both of those matches. But I think there is enough going against it that I'd prefer to go for, on a free hit, some of the more guaranteed 90-minute men. Now, obviously, he could come off after 60 minutes like he did today with a clean sheet locked, and then Arsenal could concede, so it could look like a genius move. But the other part could happen where he goes off on 59 minutes, doesn't get the clean sheet, and everyone else does. So it can go both ways. Now, I won't mention Kilman too much. I think because Ait-Nouri is such a fantastic option from an attacking point of view, I think if he's fit, you probably want to go with him ahead of Kilman. But again, 90-minute guaranteed lock. And if you think Kilman isn't going to, if you think Ait-Nouri isn't going to start and you still want to back Wolves, then Kilman might be the way to go. Now, Mitchell is a player I've kind of mentioned already as well. I think, again, it's pretty 50-50 between him and Munoz on the wing-backs. If you fancy Palace for attacking returns from those wing-backs, then Mitchell is also a pretty decent opportunity on a free hit. But I think, personally, I'd maybe marginally prefer Munoz, and then I'd also marginally prefer Ait-Nouri at Wolves for now as well. So moving into midfield, and this is where things start to get really interesting on the free hit, because there are a number of options that you could be looking at as differentials. The top of the list for me is probably going to be Elise. Now, I recommended him last week as a bit of a differential. He did start against Liverpool and actually looked really, really good. And I think he got 68 minutes, got taken off a little bit early to manage his minutes a little bit. So I think he's very likely, as long as he hasn't been re-injured again, to start in the double game week for Palace. And he's got phenomenal underlying data at almost 0.7 XGI per 90. So again, very, very differential. I think he's 1 or 2% owned at the moment, and just as threatening going forward as Eze is. So you could even look at going Elise and Eze if you really wanted to risk it, or you could look at Elise over Eze if you wanted to only have one attacking option for Palace. But either way, if he's fit, I really like him. It is a gamble that he stays fit for both matches though, so that's probably why I've not been confident enough to include him on my draft just yet. Moving down, Ødegaard as well. I've already kind of mentioned him as a 50-50 between him and Havertz, but definitely a player to consider. Please do go back earlier in the video if you want a reminder of why I like Ødegaard so much as well. Now, moving down again, Hwang Hee-chan should be back for the double game week. I think it's maybe a little bit too risky for me, but again, he has been a player in really good form this season, generally speaking. And if he does start both games, he could be another differential you could be looking at if you didn't fancy Matheus Cunha up front, for example, and you wanted to go for maybe a 3-5-2 rather than a 3-4-3. Now, two Liverpool players that I also want to take into consideration are McAllister and Jota. Now, I think particularly Jota could be interesting. I think his stock has gone up probably a little bit too much since he's been injured. He's a very good player, but his data is always around 0.5, 0.6 XGI per 90, which of course is good, but it's not elite Salah levels of XGI. So as a differential, I don't mind it. I think he is going to be managed with his minutes for the next couple of weeks because he has come back from another little bit of an injury layoff. So I think for me, it might be too risky, but we know how lethal he can be. He is a good finisher, and any player in that Liverpool front three, if they start and get 90 minutes in one, 45 in another, or 90 and 30 and 120 across the double, they could still be the player to go for. I seem to remember Gakpo not being a starting player ahead of, I think it was around game week 27, game week 28, when Liverpool last doubled, and he ended up being one of their top point scorers, despite not being one of their favoured front three at the start of the game week. So that could happen again. That could happen with Gakpo. It could happen with Jota. So definitely don't completely rule them out. Now, going into the forward line, I think there are 4 other forwards that I potentially have on my radar. The 2 with a double game week are Mateta at Palace and Calvert-Lewin at Everton. Now, Calvert-Lewin would be very, very left field, but he has scored 2 recently. I'd say one of them was very fortunate. I think the other one was a penalty. So it's not like he's in sensational form, but the data is still decent. And again, if you're really chasing, you want that ultimate differential. He does have a double game week, so who knows, you might get lucky. Mateta as well has actually looked really good on the eye recently, but he's not guaranteed those 90 minutes. And despite the fact his attacking returns have been decent, the data hasn't been amazing. So again, I think he's just a bit too differential. It's a bit too much of a pump for me, especially when you've got players like Eze and Elise to cover off the Crystal Palace attack. So for me, those 2 are players that I like, but maybe not enough for me personally to include on a free hit draft for now. But maybe you do, and maybe you disagree with me. And that's part of the reason I wanted to mention them, because at the end of the day, we've all got different opinions, and that's what makes FPL fun, right? So moving into the final 2 players that don't have a double game week up front, I do like and I do want to mention, because you might want to go against some of the double game weekers with these really high upside attackers. Those 2 players are Watkins and Isak, both in absolutely sensational form at the moment, both with decent fixtures in game week 34 as well. Great underlying data. They're both fighting tooth and nail to be top goal scorer in the Premier League this season. So I would not put it past either of them to score a brace in game week 34 and make mincemeat out of some of the other attackers that we've picked. That being said, though, I think outside of Haaland, you always tend to like backing the double game weekers. Now, I really hesitate to say that with too much confidence, because there are always going to be single game week players that outscore some of the double game weekers. But it's predicting which ones that is the challenge. I think these 2 are 2 of the more likely ones, but having 2 fixtures is obviously going to give any striker double the opportunity to get those attacking returns, or near enough. And Watkins and Isak, even with good fixtures, will have half the opportunity, half the minutes to do it in. And therefore, I think there is enough going for the other attackers. They're not complete idiots. They're good in front of goal. They've got good data. They can score good points, so I think they're good enough that I can challenge the likes of Watkins or Isak. But that being said, I do like both of them. They are fantastic single game week options, and if you are on a non-free hit strategy and had either of these players in your side right now, I certainly wouldn't be taking hits to get rid of them just to chase double game week players. These are players that you might want to keep hold of because they do have good fixtures, good data, and are in sensational form as well. So there you have it. Hopefully that helps get you thinking about the free hit in game week 34. One of those 3 drafts I think are going to be pretty close to what I lock in on, but do please leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see what my final free hit draft looks like come game week 34, because I'm sure there's plenty to think about. There's plenty that could change between now and Saturday when we lock in. So let me know in the comments below what you're thinking of doing, who the ultimate differential looks like in your team for game week 34. And as always, if you've got any questions ahead of the deadline, please do leave them in the comments and I'll try and get back to you before we lock our teams in.